Hello, it's great to have you with us. I'm Daniel Che here to bring you another special edition of Arirang News. President Moon Jae-in is hosting a dinner at the Cheongwade for U.S. President Donald Trump. Anticipation builds as to what kind of surprising decisions could be announced during his two-day visit. For an in-depth analysis of the events leading up to the trip as well as what can be expected moving forward, we are joined in the studio by Se-ryun, Professor of Law from Kyung University.
Good to be here.
And our Defense Ministry correspondent, Kim Jong-un, on my left.
Good to be here, as always.
Thank you for making time for us at this hour. And I think we will go straight to the scene where President Trump is arriving in his personal vehicle. I believe it has a very popular name. Ji-yeon, could you fill us in on this particular vehicle?
Oh, sure. President Trump's armored limousine, the Cadillac One, or the so-called Beast, has features including tear gas launchers and a bomb-proof fuel tank. Its bulletproof glass is 13 centimeters thick and can withstand ballistic and chemical weapons. It can move at a maximum speed of 80 kilometers per hour, even if its tires are damaged, and is called the moving White House. It's believed to cost more than 15 million US dollars.
Right. Security is an utmost priority in any situation like this. What kind of security protocols are we expected in this particular visit by the U.S. president?
Well, of course, the police forces of around 30,000 are on high alert, and because pro-Trump and anti-Trump rallies will be held in downtown Seoul during his two-day visit, local police have raised its security to the highest level, in which leave among law enforcement personnel is forbidden to enable full mobilization if need be. An estimated 30,000 police officers are set to be mobilized during President Trump's visit. And traffic near President Trump's accommodations, movement route, or event routes could be restricted. And near the Grand Hyatt Hotel, which is where President Trump is most likely to stay, and did say when he last visited Seoul in 2017, security was very tight, as you can imagine, with police patrolling vicinity, and the location is known to be favored due to security reasons, as there are no tall buildings nearby and is surrounded by hills.
Right, as we can see, anyone can tell this is someone very important moving in, and with the flags waving on the vehicles, it's going to be no surprise to anyone that this is President Donald Trump making his visit to South Korea, heading to Cheongwade for a dinner with South Korean President Moon Jae-in. Now, Professor Song, the protocol in terms of security, what's it like when everyone who's involved in the operations are running back-to-back shifts? They probably had a very tough time in making sure everything is in tip-top shape in Osaka for G20 Summit. This is their direct flight from Japan to South Korea for another important meeting.
Right. Security is always the utmost concern for those people who are involved, because there is a unknown situation moving to DMZ tomorrow. Maybe there will be or won't be the meeting with Kim Jong-un. So I think that those people who are involved in the security details at this point is in very high alert. All the detailed movements from one point to the other is well mapped out, and it involves two different countries with the different levels of securities are involved. So in that sense, probably in a law enforcement area in Korea, these 2 days would be a very stressful situation.
Certainly it must be, and we understand the two leaders will have a lot to talk about, whether it's a casual catch-up during the dinner at the dinner table, or when it's the summit that's scheduled for tomorrow. Ji-yeon, could you provide us with a bit of a breakdown of the main agendas for the upcoming summit?
Well, of course, apart from the denuclearization of North Korea, issues regarding the two countries' economy and defense costs are expected to be on the table. And President Trump's visit is expected to become a watershed in the denuclearization talks. And I think he's going to respond to some of the proposals pitched by President Moon Jae-in in a written interview to the press released earlier this week. President Moon said he proposed to President Trump to actively utilize inter-Korean economic cooperation cooperation as corresponding measures to North Korea's substantive denuclearization steps. And President Moon also stated that the revitalization of inter-Korean economic exchanges will contribute to create a new order of cooperation that leads to peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula and across East Asia. And he said that the East Asia Railroad Community Initiative, encompassing 6 Northeast Asian countries, including the U.S., which President Moon proposed last year, was developed from this idea. Meanwhile, President Trump is expected to back President Moon's mediating role in the denuclearization talks, as Moon Jae-in stated in the same interview that his administration saw it desirable for the talks to continue.
Right. What are Trump's likely demands, especially pertaining to military topics with South Korea?
Military talk in lowering tensions.
Right.
Well, since the signing of the military agreement, the Inter-Korean Comprehensive Military Agreement signed by the two Koreas last year, as a defense ministry correspondent who's been to the sites reporting on issues on the military buffer zones, such as the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, in which President Trump is expected to visit during his stay here in South Korea, I've got to go onto those sites and report on how the atmosphere, the vibe I got from the guard posts, the United Nations Command who've been patrolling the area for years. They've told me in interviews that the vibe is certainly different. The disarmament of the JSA, the Joint Security Area, has been starkly different. Sometimes they say hello to the North Korean soldiers, and sometimes they nod, sometimes they smile. They won't say anything back. So all these processes, I think it's an important signal that there is some changes going on since the Inter-Korean Summits held between the two Koreas last year, as well, despite the impasse in the Hanoi summit.
Right. Seeing is believing, and Professor Song, I believe, and Donald Trump is at the DMZ checking out what has changed since all the footage that he's received from various, I guess, stock footage, if you might add, about the situation in inter-Korean tensions. So this might motivate Trump to make a more positive decision towards North Korea?
Well, that's a difficult question. I think that first and foremost, I think he wants to be there. It's very presidential. He didn't really join the army before when he wanted to, but as a commander-in-chief, he wants to look presidential, being on the front and being a kind of hands-on commander-in-chief. So in that sense, there is a good photo opportunity for him to do it. But I think added on to that, I think is very symbolic. To be here at the scene with or without the meeting with Kim Jong-un. I think his presence in the Korean Peninsula, especially in the DMZ area, would signal that he's willing to get engaged in a close kind of engagement, not the battle, but negotiation at this point. So in that sense, he is sending a signal to North Korea that I'm willing to engage, and South Korea as well. We're with you as a close ally, and probably to China as well. His pivot to Asia is significant to make time to come over here and be in the DMZ area. So in that sense, I think it's multiple messages, maybe not too substantive because the visit is pretty short and probably not having an opportunity to go into details in any of the areas. But certainly photograph looks good and the symbolic meaning looks good. So depending on how you utilize his presence here, probably, potentially, good thing could happen.
Right. Optics are elements that cannot be underrated at this point in diplomacy between the two mysterious leaders.
Right.
Right. We'll get back to you, Professor, and Ji-yeon in a while. After arriving in Seoul, President Donald Trump, he arrived straight from the G20 Summit in Osaka. South Korean President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Donald Trump met for the 8th time this evening. For more details, let's go live to our Kim Mo-gyun, who is standing by at the Cheongwade for us. Mo-gyun, what are the leaders doing exactly?
Daniel, President Trump arrived at Osan Air Base at 7:10 p.m. Korea time and is soon expected to meet with President Moon Jae-in at the presidential office of Cheongwade, as he just arrived there right now. Shortly, the two leaders are set to make their way towards the Sangchunje reception hall, where a cocktail reception party has been prepared. Popular boy band EXO and star golfer Park Se-ri will also take part. After that, the two sides will attend a banquet together with their delegates, their last scheduled together this evening. 9 delegates from America will take part, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, White House advisor Ivanka Trump, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. They will be served Royal Korean cuisine. Trump's arrival in South Korea was delayed by around 20 minutes than originally scheduled. Come tomorrow at around 11 a.m., Moon and Trump will hold what would be their 8th summit, which will carry it over to a working lunch and then a joint press conference at around 1 p.m.
Well, Morgan, what's more interesting at this point than what's on the schedule is, of course, the follow-up discussions to President Trump's tweet this morning, which raised the possibility of a summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Are there any developments on that front?
Well, Daniel, we already know that Presidents Trump and Moon vowed to work together when they met in Osaka. The details haven't been revealed, but the assumption is they meant cooperation on restarting nuclear talks with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. During his press conference a few hours ago, President Trump again emphasized his good relations with the North Korean leader, claiming that he had not been the U.S. If he had not been the U.S. president, a war might have broken out with North Korea. He also expressed his intention to meet with Kim during his stay in Korea and stressed that he will make sure that Kim Jong-un is aware of it. If the two meet, it will be their 3rd time seeing each other after their historic first summit in Singapore last June and their 2nd summit in Vietnam in February. In the meantime, Korea's presidential spokesperson Ko Min-jung told reporters that regarding the possibilities of a 3rd Kim-Trump summit, nothing has been decided yet. But she added that there is no change in Seoul's position in welcoming the resumption of Seoul-Washington talks. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, Morgan, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. President Donald Trump says he wants to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the border separating the two Koreas. Although nothing has been confirmed, Seoul's presidential office pointed out that any new dialogue between Pyongyang and Washington is always a welcome development. Kim Da-mi has the latest.
The possibility of another historic meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is on the rise after Trump said North Korea responded very favorably to the pair meeting, speaking to reporters at the G20 Summit on Saturday afternoon.
I understand that we may be meeting with Chairman Kim. Kim Jong-un was very receptive. He responded, and so we'll see.
Early on Saturday, U.S. President Donald Trump offered a spontaneous invitation to North Korea's Kim Jong-un. On the day of his arrival to Seoul for a 2-day summit with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, Trump says he wants to meet with Kim to shake hands and say hello in the demilitarized zone dividing the two Koreas. He tweeted, "While there, if Chairman Kim of North Korea sees this, I would meet him at the border/DMZ just to shake his hands." Shortly after his tweets, Trump said this ahead of his meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince.
I just thought of it this morning. We'll be at the area. We may go to the DMZ or the border, as they call it. So we'll be there. And I just put out a feeler because I don't know where he is right now. He may not be in North Korea. But I said if Chairman Kim would want to meet, I'll be at the border. It's certainly, we seem to get along very well. I can tell you, we seem.
During a short coffee break ahead of the last G20 session, both Moon and Trump reportedly spoke about his tweet. South Korea's presidential office said Trump gave Moon a thumbs up and told him that they'll work together. But the White House has declined to comment about any potential meeting beyond the president's tweet. And South Korea's presidential spokesperson, too, shortly after the remarks told reporters that nothing has been decided but added that there's no change in Seoul's position in welcoming the resumption of North Korea-U.S. dialogue. With the tweet, Trump has also confirmed that he'll be visiting the DMZ while in South Korea, which May had speculated he would do. His attempt to pay a surprise visit to the DMZ back in 2017 was foiled by bad weather, which was too dangerous to fly in by helicopter. with Trump's unpredictable nature making nuclear diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula all the more fluid. There is fresh speculation that Kim and Trump could indeed meet at the DMZ for another historic summit between the two. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
We're receiving more footage of the latest on President Donald Trump's visit to South Korea, and he is receiving a warm reception at Sangchunje in Cheongwade. Right now, we are seeing the clip of him saying hello and exchanging pleasantries with South Korean officials. This is a part of Cheongwade that's been renovated not too long ago, or late last year, early this year, to make sure it's ready to receive welcome guests. Part of the plan was to be prepared for a possible visit by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, but that didn't happen, did it?
No, it didn't. But, I would like to highlight some of the significance of his, Professor Song has mentioned that his visit to the DMZ, it again highlights his close relationship with North Korean Kim Jong-un, despite the stalled talks between the two leaders. Remember President Trump boasted about having a wonderful relationship, exchanging beautiful letters between the two countries, and which led to many experts to say that this letter diplomacy has some significance. And about the tweet, as you mentioned earlier, it's a feeler. It's not that different from the letter diplomacy expressed by the two countries. I mean, his visit to the DMZ, like Professor Song has said, will symbolize his willingness to revive the momentum for talks between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Apart from walking in the footsteps of his predecessors, it's a good optics. It has high symbolic gesture. And for those who don't know about the demilitarized zone, it's a strip of land running across the Korean Peninsula that serves as a buffer zone between the two Koreas, and it's about 4 kilometers wide. It's a de facto border, and it's significant because it was established when hostilities were high between the two Koreas after the 3-year conflict of the Korean War. But now it's seen as a symbol.
Right.
So it would be a symbolic gesture.
It's a very symbolic gesture indeed, and every move he makes is under the public scrutiny or praise. President Donald Trump not donning his usual red tie today for a change. I wonder if that symbolizes something as well, or maybe it was laundry day in between the G20 Summit. He is posing for photo ops with President Moon Jae-in, and before that we saw other very prominent dignitaries like Ivanka Trump and South Korea's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa. They stand out because of their outward appearances, whether it's their stature or their unique hair color or styles. We will see the working level team have been receiving some criticism from North Korea, at least for the United States. From Pyongyang's perspective, they're saying North Korea has made some changes to their team after the Hanoi summit fallout, so the U.S. should do the same. Seem to be targeted directly at Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State.
Mike Pompeo and also Michael Bolton as well.
The hawkish duo.
Right. I think that signals some willingness to kind of suggest to Donald Trump that this talks, in order to go forward smoothly, there has to be some the concessions to be made. I think that the Kim's intention is pretty clear, that the hawkish faction in the United States have made talks pretty difficult because of the demand that has been placed on the North Korea is pretty stiff. So in that sense, the key in the minds of Chairman Kim is that the demand from the U.S. has to be scaled down, so that there would be some concessions between the two to move forward. I think that was a message given to President Xi and also Putin and also President Moon Jae-in, that you got to help us out from the North's point of view to kind of tame.
And we're seeing other very prominent figures that we recognize from circles outside of the political arena as well. Jared Kushner and, of course, Stephen Mnuchin is here, and there will be a lot of discussions about possibly economic topics and issues other than North Korea. We are seeing the door closing behind President Donald Trump as they enter the specially set tables for a very important dinner between the leaders and, of course, their top aides. We will receive more details about what's going on inside. So far, we have not been receiving any updates about the kind of menu that they prepared for this event, because usually when we have something important, we get early on the significance of all the dishes that's been prepared, and usually that's quite a juicy story that many readers would want to look into. But we haven't been getting much of that this time, have we?
I mean, the last time we had a summit here, you notice we analyzed a lot into what this food means and what this signifies. Because when you put out a menu for the top leaders of the world that's visiting South Korea for denuclearization talks, you don't give anything. Their fashion, their gestures, their smiles, their expressions, their rhetoric, and what you serve is analyzed in detail. What kind of message it portrays. So right now, I think they're keeping their cards very close to their chest right now, even from the local press. Maybe it's because it's a very sensitive topic. It sends a message. If it's too strong, North Korea could take it offensive. If it's too weak, what would it say about South Korea-U.S. alliance? That's what I got. And I noticed that from the video that there's a different shade of blue with Ivanka dress.
Right.
Ivanka Trump's dress. I can just make that out from the video. What do you think?
Well,
you mentioned the blue tie.
Well, I'm not a special colorist or anyone with expertise.
That's all we can get right
is
now.
linked to the psychological connections with the colors they choose. But I'm sure they have a large team that makes sure everything that's out there visually, it speaks out volumes about what they intend to do here in South Korea. Speaking of which,
one speculation might be that in a Korean flag, south is represented by blue and north is red. So he's in the south. Maybe that prompted him to choose blue. And I think about the menus and all those things. I kind of think that this summit meeting is only possible because of the Osaka meeting. So it's a sort of a tack-on meeting. He's in the area, and it's easier for him to pop over to the South
Does it relieve a lot of the pressure on the host, South Korea, when we are setting this banquet for the visiting president?
Right. So a lot of schedules are fluid. The Osaka schedule might run long, and the arrival time might not be exact. So a lot of schedules are kind of an iffy area. So probably menus and everything probably has to be kind of a on the go kind of thing. So a lot of details that should have been or would have been decided a long time ago, if it was just a standalone visit, probably is on the kind of fluid side.
Right. Possibly the ideal menu for welcoming President Donald Trump could be something related with fast food chains.
Oh, yeah.
Could be,
I knew that you would mention that.
We don't know for sure what is going on until every detail is unveiled. The decision of President Donald Trump to suddenly say, I want to meet Kim Jong-un at the border and have a handshake. What possibly prompted him to make that particular decision, and was it timed carefully to be announced as the G20 wound to a close?
Well, what he said was that, well, I just thought of something this morning, and we're in the area, why not, if Kim is willing? And he did say, I don't know if he's in the country or not. That seems like a kind of overblown speculation, because if Kim is out of the country, probably everybody would know at this point. That sounds like his kind of modus operandi, where he wants to be very informal about the relationship. I mean, the language has been a little bit different. He says, you know, he's in love with Kim and friends and letter writing. Who does letters these days, right? But his informal approach, I think, is designed to show that their relationship is very close. And at least the New York Times has reported that this idea of meeting Kim in the DMZ area was floated several days before the meeting. But of course, the White House kind of cautioned that it should not be reported at the time, because, you know, president's whereabouts is a national security matter. So I know that he has been thinking about it, but whether it was turned into kind of a semi-secret schedule with his team all on board and also transmitted to or communicated to North Korea. Probably I'm doubtful because everybody denies it at this point. But again, Donald Trump has been the kind of an ultimate newsmaker, and he knows what gets the ratings. So this kind of surprise event is not far out of his menus and not out of what he would do. It's kind of a Donald Trump kind of thing. So I think not many people will be surprised if this spur of the moment spontaneous meeting does take place tomorrow.
Right. Some of us in the news team were jokingly talking about a three-way summit could be even possible with Trump because he's so unpredictable. And at the same time, is unpredictable in such a way that he might say one thing and then flip the switch the next day, right?
Right. I think that his actions and his deeds and the words probably has to be interpreted in the context of the negotiation. Metaphorically, Kim and Donald Trump has been sitting on the negotiation table for a long time at this point. Kim has tried to bring in Putin on his side and Xi on his side, and the President Trump wanted to use sanctions, different kinds of devices to pressure him. But at the same time, he's been always saying that you're my friend, we want to get the deal done. So there is always a tactics of keeping the opponent at bay, but at the same time giving them pressure and kind of incentive to engage at the same time. I think that this kind of pattern you can see in many different fronts that he's engaged in. So tomorrow, the DMZ event is also in line of that kind of tactics to continue the courting or the dance or whatever you call it that applies to a negotiation.
I mean, this is especially important because the two sides are at opposing ends that the common ground is not easy to grasp. I mean, the letter diplomacy portrays the willingness to narrow their differences with little to continue from. So I guess his confidence is like a mask of his willingness to denuclearize, trying to urge North Korea to denuclearize, but has little room to negotiate with.
Right, Jian, the Hanoi fallout has seemed like an insurmountable mountain, but could these gestures to come while Trump is in South Korea, could they be the irresistible force that could move this immovable object?
I mean, you have to consider the fact that North Korea has been urging the U.S. to come up with, quote, new calculations. I mean, while the U.S. maintains its commitment that economic sanctions placed on the regime will continue until its goal of fulfilling the final, fully verified denuclearization is met. But with the series of summits gathered at the G20 Summit, we'll have to see if President Trump, in light of all the information he's been able to gather, including, President Moon Jae-in tonight and tomorrow, whether this can come up with new proposals that could prompt the regime to budge and could lead for a third summit between President Trump and North Korean Kim Jong-un.
Right. Once again, during his presser at the G20 Summit, Trump closed it by saying, I may or may not meet Kim.
Right. That's the kind of thing that he does. One of the concerns might be that his schedule is not concrete at any point until he shows up at certain places. But another thing is because he is supposed to be spontaneous as a proposal to meet at the DMZ, probably that's why he says may or may not. Probably in his mind, this is a good feeler or the proposal, because if Kim shows up, I mean, what does it look like? He said, well, I'm going to be in the area anyway, but Kim, if you would drop everything and come to me and shake hands for 2 minutes and go on your way, probably that shows who's the boss and who's in charge. So in that sense, it's kind of dynamics where that could shift some center of gravity towards him, and in the negotiation area. It shows that the North Korea wants this more than Trump does.
Well, like you said, Trump does what Trump wants, seemingly, in terms of running the office. But there were concerns about the hogs and doves surrounding him and how much of an influence they have in his decisions.
Right. But in that sense, I think you can say the same thing. Donald Trump wants to be the one who makes a decision, but he wants all the options available. And having the hawkish side very vocal is, in a way, very useful because he can make the final decision saying that, well, hawkish faction wants the war, but I'm the one who wants the peace, and kind of pulled back in. It's a kind of the very, Machiavellian the tactics that have been used for hundreds of years. But that's a lot of times useful, and it's also a sign or the message that, look, I'm your friend. You can rely on me in this negotiation, because if not, then there are these attack dogs around me that could probably wreak havoc on your side. So in that sense, he's using kind of a very crude but traditional tactics that is used in the negotiation table.
Right, being very difficult with some people and using these difficult people against some other difficult people seems to be the tool of trade.
Right.
Right, we're going to connect to another expert now. After months of insisting he's not in a hurry to reach a real deal with North Korea, President Donald Trump tweeted he's willing to meet Kim Jong-un at the DMZ. Pyongyang appears to be on board for now. Its vice foreign minister said the meeting would be a significant event. To find out what this sudden development could lead to, we connect with Stephen Noerper, a professor at Columbia University and director of the Korea Society in New York. Thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you.
Well, President Trump is scheduled to visit the demilitarized zone on Sunday. How likely is this surprise meeting with Kim, in your opinion? Trump said he's happy to just shake his hands and say hello. What can we expect from this exchange, possibly a third summit?
Well, it's certainly highly likely, especially since we've heard both good statements on the part of the U.S. side through the president's tweet, as well as North Korea's KCNA and Vice Minister Choe mentioning that this would be good and memorable. So that's a positive indicator. And it's no surprise if we remember 1 year ago, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un sat down with only 24 hours notice, and that put the Singapore talks back online. So this is really meant to kickstart the next round, and it shows the importance of South Korean facilitation and the commitment of the White House, which really wants to see a little further progress. Remember, we have limited time here as we get into the U.S. political season in the fall and winter. So it behooves both North Korea and the United States to get back to the table sooner than not. Osaka presents that opportunity through the G20 and through this visit between Trump and Moon Jae-in.
And President Trump has been flaunting his pen-pal relationship with Kim Jong-un and heaping praise on the young leader despite North Korea's projectile launch last month. Are the flatteries part of a well-calculated strategy?
Well, it's part of his art of the deal, which is to use coaxing as well as praise to try to create a positive reinforcement and strike at a deal. That seems to be his vantage. This is a top-down led process, which is different than what we've had in the past. So the words of the president and his attitude are deemed important, and it seems to be one where the North Korean leader is most comfortable leader to leader. So if it works, it works. And the important thing is to get to the table to strike at denuclearization. And again, the critical roles and the timing in terms of the necessity for all the leaders involved. Kim wants relief in terms of economic modernization. Trump would like to score a political victory before heading into the U.S. political season. And certainly Moon Jae-in, for his popularity and the credibility of his approach on inter-Korean relations, would like to see a win as well.
And before the G20 Summit in Osaka, Chinese leader Xi Jinping visited North Korea, which was largely interpreted as a form of messaging and pressure. Do you think this worked, and do you see Beijing playing a greater role in the denuclearization talks going forward?
Well, yes, indeed. It seems to have been the signal with Xi's visit, and it's something that should both positively reinforce Seoul's instinct that there is a desire in the regional community to facilitate that reconciliation. On the other hand, too, it pulls the mediation or facilitation role of Seoul a little bit more off center because they have to allow for Xi's role. But remember, it's also the North Koreans and Pyongyang playing a bit with Beijing, with Washington, and with Seoul to try to strike at what they consider the best accommodation and what will get them the most economic assistance. So be prepared for a more significant Chinese role and be prepared for a more significant Russian role as well. Putin has made that clear, and the meeting in the Russian Far East with Kim also signaled that. So we will see more international actors, and again, that's to Seoul's benefit. And the international actors need to be looking at Seoul leadership on this front.
Well, President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's second summit in Hanoi earlier this year ended early with no deal. If we do see a third summit soon, will this third time be the charm? Will both sides be more prepared this time around?
Oh, sure. I've always said Hanoi was a part A of an A-B or an A, B, and C process. We learned some important things from it, despite the walk away. And this next round, both leaders, meaning the North Korean leader and the U.S. leader, will agree to come only if there has been some arrangement, some agreement on at minimum partial denuclearization in exchange for a partial lifting of sanctions. So do expect to see more happen this next time around. It won't simply be symbolic. And it's an important path, a complicated path. So we in the international community need to allow a good deal of time for this process. And they're overcoming 70 years of hostility. And that's important to remember as well. But everything now for the North Koreans lines up by way of a progressive Seoul administration and a White House that seems to be receptive. But the clock is ticking. That may not always be the case. So it behooves North Korea to really come and make some accommodation. And the White House seems intent on making that happen in its recent statements in preparation for a new round of talks.
All right, Dr. Noerper, thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right, like Dr. Noerper just said, it looks like China and Russia could step up to the plate and play a significant role, but we still have big question marks about their dedication to improving North Korea's nuclear situation for the rest of the world.
Right, especially China, which is in a very heated tussle with trade war with the United States. Probably this is China's opportunity to say that, well, I can help out, but in order to do that, we need some concessions or we need some better terms in a trade war. Probably this is an opportunity for China to say that, but nonetheless, their seemingly significant role and influence over North Korea has always been a weapon for China. And because of that, probably this is a good opportunity to kind of use that chip against the United States. Russia, probably it's the same thing because of the bad rap that they received because of interference with the U.S. Election campaign. Probably the Russia is more incentivized to show some influence in this matter so that they will be on the good side of either Donald Trump or the voters in the United States. Either way, though, it looks like old kind of the territorial map showing the superpowers and the either side of the border in a Cold War kind of formation is coming back in the Korean Peninsula case. So whether they would, their interests would coincide and intersect, probably that's the key of how to package this thing so that you can make a Korean Peninsula peace regime involving the superpowers in economic and security and other matters. So in that sense, we have not seen that kind of comprehensive package that benefits everybody. And I think if President Moon wants to play the role, I think rather than just getting the North Korea and the United States to come together to talk, I think there has to be a conscious effort to look at other countries and see how they can benefit and contribute so that everybody will get involved in this. On that point, I think that his emphasis on the economic opportunity that flow out of the peace regime in the Korean Peninsula is very significant. But the timing is pretty iffy because that presupposes that the economic sanction imposed on the North Korea be lifted to have any of that happen. So if that message can be well calibrated with what United States wants, probably it's a pretty good message going forward.
Speaking of sanctions, Ji-yeon, with the historic significant meeting to come at the DMZ and the positive note that President Trump has said, what are the chances of perhaps the U.S. leader being a little bit more open towards easing sanctions to North Korea?
I don't think that's going to happen. But as I've mentioned earlier, that President Moon had proposed using inter-Korean economic cooperation as a corresponding measure to denuclearization talks. So what I've mentioned earlier is that there's a lack of common ground, wiggle room for the two parties, North Korea and the U.S., Washington, to come together. And President Moon has been offering that inter-Korean economic cooperation. I mean, the abrupt shutdown of the Kaesong industrial complex is also a symbolic gesture of the cut of the inter-Korean economic ties, which hasn't been resolved even in South Korea among their businessmen. They've wanting to go to North Korea to recuperate what they've lost. So these are in play. I don't think the UN sanctions would be eased anytime soon, but as mentioned, President Moon in an earlier interview released earlier this week, he said the irreversible stage for determining whether North Korea has entered an irreversible stage in denuclearization is a shutdown of all the facilities in the Yongbyon nuclear facility. And that could be used as a wiggle room. If he communicates that right to President Trump, maybe it could serve as a watershed for denuclearization talks. That's been the consensus among some of the experts that I've been interviewing.
Hopefully we are seeing some baby steps being taken forward, because we've seen a full stop, not much of a progress between talks between North Korea and the U.S. Speaking of not much progress, when President Moon Jae-in spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping, it seemed like the THAAD subject was brought up again, China asking it to be removed from South Korea.
Right. China always, this is not the first time they mentioned THAAD, and last time that happened, it accompanied a pretty severe economic kind of sanctions against the Korean companies. So it was not a good news for a lot of Korean companies. China's message about this THAAD is always twofold. It's one towards South Korea, but ultimately it's towards the United States. And it's not just about the Korean Peninsula issue, but we probably know that the United States is using THAAD as kind of a deterrent against China and have a pretty significant military presence with a recognized ability with THAAD against China. So it's a very complicated matter. It's not something that the Korean government can decide, because last time the way it resolved was that the THAAD was deployed by United States military in Korea, and Korea's role is to provide a place to be deployed, and even that was pretty dicey issue. So I think that China is probably predictably using this as a chip, and probably his message is not only to South Korea but to U.S. And related to the trade war, we could imagine that if there be any further roles for the China to use it against North Korea, then there has to be a better deal on the trade side, but that should also include some sort of safeguard against the THAAD being used against China.
Right. Speaking of defense matters, the U.S. will definitely be interested in talking about one particular topic, which is cost sharing with South Korea, right?
Right, but before I go further with cost sharing, I have a different view from Professor Song about his opinions on China. I mean, although it could complicate things with the denuclearization talks, President Moon has said that Xi's visit to the north is a positive thing, that it could be a turning point for dialogue. So there has been, although it could complicate things, they say that in return, President Moon could relay the results of what he heard from President Xi from the G20 summit to President Trump, and this could reinforce the momentum for dialogue for denuclearization rather than complicate things. So there's a different opinion about a wiggle room about China and its bringing up with that issues. It could complicate the denuclearization talks, but also it could bring about a turning point for the denuclearization process, because it is the former member of the six-party talks, and it's natural for them to have a say on these matters regarding the security issues concerning the region.
Recently, the leaders of China and North Korea, they had a meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping paying a state visit for the first time in over a decade. It was a very hotly anticipated one, but some experts say this was very short and very somewhat of a formality. What does that spell about the relationship between the two traditional allies at this point?
Well, I think rather than looking at the duration of this stay, it's important that the result of what President Xi Jinping had told President Moon about his visit is that the top priority for North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was about his regime's security, the continuity of the regime. So, and that the North Korean leader is willing to give up its nuclear weapons if the regime is guaranteed to continue. So it's an important information for the denuclearization talks to continue, and it's important information not only for that, but I bet President Moon has heard a lot of more information that could be helpful for the talks to keep going.
Right. With the G20 summit, many leaders, key regional players, including the leaders of China and even Russia, who had an interaction with North Korea, speaking to President Donald Trump as well as President Moon Jae-in. What would these two leaders of South Korea and the U.S. have learned about approaching North Korea for further negotiations at this point?
Well, we know that they are kind of lining up in a sense on the negotiation table. The Russia and China on the North Korea side, and Japan and Korea is on sort of on the U.S. side. But I think the status is the same thing. I don't think anybody is speculating that that issue will be any different because the China brought up this time. It's natural that it was brought up because it was brought up before, but it was being used as a chip because they're in the negotiation in a multifaceted ways. China is in the trade negotiation with the United States, but at the same time they are the player in the negotiation between the North Korea and the U.S. So they want to secure a better position in this negotiation, and they're using any and every available chips possible, and that is a prime chip that China can bring up. I don't think China expects that by demanding that any more than the last time, it'll change, but it will soften the position of the U.S. and the United and South Korea. And going forward, this becomes kind of a point where they can hook to a further negotiation down the road, so that this whole negotiation becomes a kind of a whole package thing.
Right.
And going back to the including the THAAD issues, these are superpowers, the interests. At this point, North Korea has been kind of on a lone wolf on the brinkmanship. But the way I see it is that any kind of deal in a multilateral stages in this global governance area, the success comes more often or in a better shape if all the interested parties or stakeholders are on the table and participate. So in that sense, even if it's a tactic for the North Korea to have another ally on the negotiation table, I see a positive on that, because if China has some stake in making this a success. And if Russia has another stake in making this success, I think that it's all the more better. I don't think that the unpredictable figures and the Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump alone can make this deal without South Korea, without China, without Japan and Russia. So if this is a step towards making a whole package or peace regime that involves everybody, I think is definitely a positive step.
Right. We're now going to take you back to Cheongwade in South Korea, where the event is taking place. We're not going to be able to look into the actual dinner site itself, but we do have some clips of the interaction with the media before the two leaders went inside for the dinner. Let's have a listen and take a look.
Thank you. It's going to be very interesting.
Is there going to be a three-way summit with the two Koreas and yourself?
Well, we're going to see. They're working things out right now. Thank you for being
Have you
here.
heard anything from North Korea today yet?
Thank you. We have, yes.
Official.
Thank you. It's going to be very interesting.
Is there going to be a three-way summit with the two Koreas and yourself?
Well, we're going to see. They're working things out right now. Thank you for being
Have you
here.
heard anything from North Korea today yet?
Thank you. We have, yes.
Official.
Thank you. It's going to be very interesting.
Is there going to be a three-way summit with the two Koreas and yourself?
Well, we're going to see. They're working things out right now. Thank you for being
Have you
here.
heard anything from North Korea today yet?
Thank you. We have, yes.
Official.
And there you have it, leaving room for possibilities, as Ji-yeon mentioned. He loves to do that, keep people on edge in some sense and suspense. The question was, will there be a three-way meeting between the leaders of South Korea, the United States, and North Korea?
He's leaving all rooms open. All options are on the table. I mean, I bet it's his top-down approach, diplomacy in its highest level. I mean, it's certainly keeping the press on its toes on whether there will be a historic summit between the three parties. I mean, it would be great optics as well for reporters. Never in history has there been two presidents from the two Koreas and the U.S. president in an inter-Korean border village, probably in the DMZ or the truce village of Panmunjom. That would be unprecedented, and it has a symbolic meaning. Whether they'll have time to talk out their differences, we'll have to see, but certainly for symbolism or for optics, it's unprecedented. It would be the height of my career as well.
It would be something that many people would look forward to, and it will be reminiscent of the moment when President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un shook hands, crossed over to each side, and the reporters just erupted.
Right, as it was before. This time, if that happens in three-way meeting at the DMZ, it's certainly a front page matter, not just for the Korean media, but around the world. I think that optic would be very good for President Moon Jae-in, because it looks like he's the one who put these two leaders together. And that optics, even if there's no substantive exchanges happened, it does look like there has to be something going on there, in terms of setting some kind of peace regime towards a peaceful resolution. So in that sense, symbolism and also optics, and also the photo opportunity for Moon Jae-in and also the President Trump, it's a no-lose situation. It just heightens the expectation that something will happen, and it's a very big contrast to what happened to Hanoi, the big failure, but this time around. Even if it's just a pretty picture, I think it's worth having.
And we know North Korea loves the spotlight, and I'm sure they will welcome the move, and they're possibly burning the midnight oil planning for that event if it happens tomorrow.
I mean,
Right.
yeah, it would reinforce President Moon's emphasis that behind-the-scenes talks are underway, that although the stalemate since the Hanoi talks, under the surface, there are a lot of movement going on, so you don't have to worry. The momentum of dialogue is still ongoing. It would reinforce that
right.
statement.
It will add more confidence to those who listen to President Moon Jae-in's comments that it isn't just wishful thinking or
Right.
speculations, but he knows what's going on at this point. Speaking of President Moon Jae-in and his role, has it always been the mediator or the middle person or the negotiator? Would it change from this very dynamic moment moving forward?
I think so. I think at first it was just meaningful to have two sides put together in a same room to have the dialogue. And first dialogue, second dialogue, now third, and there were many other talks between the North Korea and South Korea and other parties. So in that sense, the President Moon's role should evolve with the foundation has laid it so far. If the dialogue happening was the focus, now going forward has to be a certain comprehensive package of the peace regime in the Korean Peninsula that everybody can pitch in. And going back to what we've been talking about before, it's not just about North Korea and the Donald Trump exchanging some concessions about the security and the economic regimes. I think it has to be something that China could benefit and Japan could benefit, and all those things that goes to not only the security but the economic opportunities. I think that could have more subscribers, more clicks of favorable responses in the superpowers. I say that because everybody knows that the Korean Peninsula situation has been difficult only because the superpowers' interest has not aligned, and there were some kind of forces that split us apart because the Korean Peninsula has been kind of a buffer zone between the two different the interests. So if we can kind of eliminate that kind of negative vibe and kind of come to an agreement on how everybody can benefit this, and if that package can be drafted and pushed by President Moon, probably that would be the biggest legacy he will and the accomplishment that he will make.
Right, more things for the Nobel Peace Prize Committee to consider and spend sleepless night over. Well, moving on to another story, the highly anticipated U.S.-China trade talks between President Donald Trump and Xi Jinping ended in Osaka, where they agreed on a trade truce. Kim Jae-sung has the details.
Presidents Trump and Xi agreed to resume trade talks that broke down in May and to stop imposing new tariffs for now.
We won't be adding an additional, tremendous amount of, we have, I guess, $350 billion left, which could be taxed or could be tariffed. And we're not doing that. We're going to work with China on where we left off. China is going to be buying a tremendous amount of food and agricultural product, and they're going to start that very soon, almost immediately.
At the news conference in Osaka, Trump added that the U.S. will give China a list of agricultural goods to buy. China's state-run Xinhua news agency also reported that the two sides agreed to restart trade negotiations and that the U.S. will not impose new tariffs. Another agreement was struck regarding Chinese tech firm Huawei. Citing security risks, the U.S. Commerce Department last month blacklisted Huawei, banning U.S. companies from supplying parts to the Chinese firm without a license. But Trump said
U.S. companies can sell their equipment to Huawei. We're talking about equipment where there's no great national emergency problem with it, but the U.S. companies can sell their equipment.
Trump added that Huawei is the last issue in trade talks, showing how tricky and complex it is to ban trading with Huawei. The months-long U.S.-China trade spat has resulted in tariffs on a total of $360 billion of goods on one another as of date. It remains to be seen if the U.S. and China can reach a deal on trade, as the two still differ on U.S. demands over intellectual property protection and China's structural reform, among others. But for now, there is no escalation in trade tensions, and trade talks will continue. In a way, it's just like the 90-day ceasefire agreed last December when Presidents Trump and Xi agreed on a trade truce during their talks on the sidelines of the G20 Summit in Argentina. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
Before this development, Washington and Beijing had been tangled in a near one-year-long tariff tit-for-tat. Our Ko-Roon-hee walks us through the timeline of the trade conflict between the world's two biggest economies.
The writing was on the wall even before President Trump took office. Back in 2016 at a rally in Indiana, Trump, the presidential candidate, signaled a possible trade war with China, saying, quote, "We can't continue to allow China to rape our country." After Trump became president, he started using tariffs as a means to reduce U.S. trade deficits with China, which amounted to around $420 billion last year. In January 2018, Trump slapped tariffs on imported washing machine and solar panels, including those from China. China retaliated in April by imposing tariffs on about $3 billion worth of American goods. Although the two sides met for high-level trade talks in May, they could not find a resolution to the dispute. Trade tensions between the two countries have steadily risen since the second half of 2018. Washington and Beijing each imposed tariffs on $360 billion worth of one another's goods between last July and early June. Products affected by tariffs include vegetables, clothing, and machinery. Analysts say the trade war has hurt Beijing's coffers more than it has Washington, given that China's exports to the U.S. was more than quadruple than that of shipments going the other way in 2018. And China's GDP growth has been signaling the impact. Last year, the Chinese economy grew by 6.6%, its slowest pace since 1990. On the other hand, the U.S. posted a GDP growth of 2.9% in 2018, the best annual gain since 2015. The trade spat has also led to uncertainties in the global financial markets, dashing investor confidence around the world. Ko-Roon-hee, Arirang News.
World leaders have wrapped up the G20 Summit in Osaka in a communique released on Saturday following the two-day meeting. G20 leaders call for the need to realize a free, fair, and non-discriminatory trade environment. It warned that global economic growth remains weak and downside risks linger amid intensified trade and geopolitical tensions. The statement was a watered-down version that omitted a phrase calling for the need to resist trade protectionism. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, which chaired the summit, said the leaders agreed on fundamental principles backing a free trade system to ensure open markets and a level playing field for all nations. All G20 countries, with the exception of the U.S., also reaffirmed their commitment to the Paris Agreement on fighting climate change. Let's return to our Kim Mo-gyun, who is at the Blue House for us. Mo-gyun, what's the latest you have for us?
Well, Daniel, President Trump arrived at Osan Air Base at 7:10 p.m. Korea time and met with President Moon Jae-in here at the presidential office of Cheongwade at around 8 p.m. Before heading to a banquet, the two leaders dropped by the Sangchunje reception hall, where a cocktail reception party has been prepared. Popular boy band EXO and star golfer Park Se-ryun took part in the reception. After a group photo shoot, the two leaders went for a closed-door dinner together with their delegates, which is their last scheduled together this evening. 9 delegates from America are taking part, including White House advisor Ivanka Trump and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. They're also being served royal cuisine, and the main menu will be American beef steak seasoned with Korean bulgogi sauce, a symbol of cooperation and harmony between Seoul and Washington. Trump's arrival at the Blue House was delayed by around 20 minutes than originally scheduled. Come tomorrow at around 11 a.m., Moon and Trump will hold what would be their 8th summit. A total of 10 officials, including the presidents from both sides, will participate during the talks, including Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, National Security Advisor John Bolton, Washington's ambassador to South Korea Harry Harris, and Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney from Washington's side, and Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa, Presidential Chief of Staff No Young-min, National Security Advisor Chung Yi-yong, and Korean Ambassador to the United States Cho Yoon-jae from the South Korean side. They will then proceed with a working lunch and then a joint press conference at around 1 p.m. President Trump is expected to visit the demilitarized zone, which serves as the inter-Korean border, on Sunday. He initially expressed hopes for a meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un there, but as of now, it's still unclear whether Kim will show up. Back to you, Daniel.
All right, well, again, thank you for those updates. We appreciate it. And now, coming back here in the studio to our experts panels here with me, as I've Professor Se-ryun of Kyung University, Professor of Law, of course, and our Defense Ministry correspondent, Kim Ji-yeon. We're going to go back to what was covered previously about the possible trilateral summit. There were some criticisms that President Moon Jae-in faced that perhaps he was being too lenient to North Korea and too understanding. How would you view this notion?
I think that there was ample reason to speculate that his kind of stance was too close to North Korea because, you know, he inherited the sunshine kind of policies of Kim Dae-jung. Now it's a moonshine, and everybody expected that he would be more favorable to the North Korea. Probably he's shown that through his kind of dealings with North Korea. But at the same time, I think that he's been pretty good at kind of as a host role to have the dialogues to continue. So if the theme is to make his role kind of evolve and be more substantive, probably that would be the next step. I think that the key, one of the keys, I would speculate, is that so far the talk has been kind of stalled on a pretty significant point, which is that the North Korea has proposed the dismantling of a Yongbyon facility. But the United States, their assessment is that the Yongbyon facility in and of itself is not substantial enough to lift the sanctions and all those. I think there is some reassessment of what Yongbyon facility means, if it's just a Yongbyon facility or adjoining kind of systems that they have built. If you can include all those systems that makes up the nuclearization machinery in the north, probably that's something that the United States can say, oh, okay, Yongbyon, that qualifies as Yongbyon plus rather than just Yongbyon. So if talks would continue and the sanctions lifted, probably that scenario depends on what kind of agreement that they have on what North is willing to do, and specifically what Yongbyon dismantlement really signifies. I think that that's something that kind of a discussion that the President Moon can kind of steer the working groups towards. And if that happens, probably talks would continue and in a positive way. If not, probably the United States point, their position is that, well, we have put the tough negotiation deal on the table and time is on our side. And if North wants to capitulate, that's good. If not, then we'll just sit back and wait. So in that sense, if the Yongbyon definition or that aspect is not resolved, then probably the stalemate will continue.
And President Donald Trump has said he wants to meet with South Korean businessmen, a couple of movers and shakers. And
Right.
this comes at a time when there are some concerning developments in terms of trade matters with the U.S. and the rest of the world. What should we brace ourselves for some kind of a negative impact?
Well, it seems like the business leaders are bracing themselves because for some good reasons. The trade war is very concerning to them because 20% of our trade is with China, and also Huawei deal, especially Samsung and SK, they have a pretty big stake on that deal. So if a president comes out and say, well, help us to stop the business with Huawei, then that puts their business in a very big bind. And remember last time that President Trump met with the business leaders in his last visit, he demanded, kind of in a veiled threat, to increase the investment in the U.S. Market. And as a result, there were some factories cropping up in South Carolina and Tennessee by Samsung and LG. So probably Donald Trump, if he thinks that he can push these business leaders, and the result will happen. Probably that's something he can bring back to his campaign rally and kind of boast. So this is a win-win deal for him. So probably that's the reason why a lot of business leaders are bracing themselves.
Right, Jian, before we wrap things up, how much of an impact would President Trump's visit and personal talks with South Korean officials have on defense cost sharing and also the preparations for OPCON transfer?
Well, regarding OPCON transfer isn't in the main agenda because the two sides have already, when Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan, now the former Acting Defense Secretary Shanahan came back, they have relayed the results of their understanding and agreement on that issue. But regarding the defense costs is still a question that the two sides have to answer, especially when President Trump has asked for more dedication from the South Korean government to pitch in more on the defense costs to maintain the 28,500 U.S. troops currently stationed here in Korea. But there are also moves by the U.S. Senate and the House Armed Services Committee to block any significant reduction against President Trump's aspirations to have reductions in that budget. So we'll see if the two countries can resolve this issue considering their emphasis on their ironclad alliance when it comes to defense. So we'll be up to date on that as well.
Right. Let's hope things are going to be smooth sailing with President Trump being inspired after watching the progress made at the DMZ and perhaps shaking hands with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
I hope so.
Well, lastly, with the election around the corner for the U.S. President Donald Trump, where is he coming from in terms of this particular visit to South Korea at a very important time in his political history, at least in terms of doing a repeat at the Oval Office?
Right, and that's a kind of a interesting point, because if you think about what can help him win, and probably kind of a guardian of the world peace is a very, very good title to have. But if that happens right now, probably it's a long way from the election campaign when voters are voting. Probably if his accomplishment, the word peace, is last year's accomplishment, probably that does not translate well to the vote. So I think that schedule is in the minds of either Donald Trump or his strategy advisors. When should this happen so that the impact and the aura of this success will translate into more votes to the voters? So in that sense, the time is on their side, I think. He's not in a hurry, that if it happens sometime towards the end of this year or the beginning of the next year, probably that's a good point where the voters will have fresh in their minds what Donald Trump did for the world. So in that sense, it's in the calculation, I think. But also, this North Korea issue is a good, newsworthy items that can divert attentions from the domestic troubles that he has. Namely, there are a lot of Democratic presidential candidates having debates these days. So there are a lot of news time is allocated towards that side of it. Probably he wants to get back some news coverage on his side and Republican side. So he wants to use this and also maybe the Iran the fiasco as well to recapture some of the tensions that has lost to the other side. So I think that he has a lot of things that he could use his media savvy to massage the optics and the messages to the voters.
Speaking of using media savvy to massage the voters and the viewers, he does have a lot on his plate other than the domestic affairs with China, with Mexico, although a little one, and of course a major one with some countries deeply concerned with Iran. With him having to juggle all these matters and having to calculate his next move, how much of an impact do these concerns have in terms of his ability to clearly and carefully consider the issues related with inter-Korean affairs?
Right. That's a very interesting issue as well. You know, I see some commonalities in those negotiations. And we kind of talked about it a lot, that his dealings and how he governs and also he deals with the diplomatic matters has a lot to do with how he negotiates his real estate deal. So he puts the issue on the table. Sometimes if he has to, he kind of breaks the previous deal so that he can renegotiate and put very tough deal on the table and put sanctions on it or tariffs. But all along, his message to the other side is, you're my friend, we're in love, and talks will continue. And he shows his willingness to walk away if no good deal is in the horizon. And he waits. So he's waiting on the Mexico deal as well, and the Iran deal, climate change, and the Korean deal as well. So we see some commonalities of how he deals with other matters in a very negotiation-savvy manner. So in terms of what happens in the Korea issues, probably it's indicative of what could happen to other deals. If this succeeds, and that's an indication that it works in the diplomatic stages as well, because there are a lot of critics and says that no, that does not work in the international politics and the diplomacy. But if this works with the Kim Jong-un, probably that'll indicate that, see, this works, and this will work with Mexico and Iran, and that will be a pretty good success story for Donald Trump, was saying that what I have learned in the real estate deal in New York translates well in the world stage. We have not seen that yet, but I think that that's something that a lot of people are looking at, saying that this kind of unpredictable style, but who's good at the negotiation, will be a contributor in the world peace and the politics or not.
Right. We'll have more letters and pen pals between the leaders, I guess.
Bigger envelopes for this very innovative trailblazers in the days and months and perhaps years to come. Professor Se-ryun, thank you so much for coming in, and Ji-yeon, thank you so much for your contributions and making our program complete today.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Well, it's time for us to wrap things up. Do tune in to Arirang News tomorrow for our continued special coverage of President Trump's visit, including another important summit with President Moon Jae-in. Thank you so much for watching.